The gates of Northridge Military Academy loomed like steel jaws waiting to close, the kind of place built to strip away weakness and forge something harder than bone. The parade ground shimmered in the late morning sun, every line of recruits in crisp formation, boots striking the asphalt with mechanical precision. Above them, banners fluttered, emblems of honor, tradition, and the weight of history pressing down like a hand on every shoulder. Into this crucible stepped Captain Elena Vega, her uniform pressed sharp, her duffel bag slung casually over one shoulder. On paper, she was no one remarkable. Her personnel file read like a lukewarm resume. A few deployments overseas, support roles that never made headlines, commendations that seemed polite rather than earned. Her age, early 30s, put her older than most academy staff instructors, but without the medals or scars to justify her presence. To the cadets who had spent years clawing for recognition in this place, her assignment as an observer instructor felt like an insult. The whispers began before she even crossed the courtyard. Political placement, diversity checkmark, some colonel's pet project. The mutters rippled like static through the rows of gray uniforms, but none carried louder than Cadet First Class Darren Cole. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of square jaw that looked carved for recruitment posters, Cole had already earned a reputation as the golden boy of his company. His scores were at the top, his ambition written in the swagger of every step. To him, Elena Vega was a fraud dropped into his world, and worse, she threatened the natural order where he stood at the peak. The company had just been dismissed from drills when he made his move. Elena was inspecting the training yard, her hands clasped behind her back, expression unreadable. Cole stepped forward, his boots clicking hard against the pavement so no one could mistake his intent. Around them, cadets slowed, conversations dying as eyes turned to the confrontation forming like storm clouds. "Captain Vega," Cole said, his voice respectful in tone but sharpened with challenge. "Permission to speak freely?" Her gaze lifted to him, calm, dark eyes that didn't blink against the heat or the attention. "Go ahead, Cadet." He squared his shoulders, making sure the others heard every word. "With all due respect, ma'am, what gives you the right to teach us? From what I've seen in your file, you've got a handful of deployments, none of them combat rated. No special citations, no command experience worth mentioning. The men and women here," he gestured to the crowd behind him, "we're training to be leaders. We're preparing to carry lives on our shoulders. And you," he let the pause drag, a blade twisting, "you don't seem qualified to lead us across a parking lot." A sharp murmur rolled through the watching cadets, equal parts shock and agreement. Some smirked, others nodded subtly, their doubts voiced at last by the academy's star pupil. Elena stood motionless, her posture perfect, her face carved from patience. She let the silence settle until even Cole began to feel the weight of it pressing against him. "Your concern is noted," she said finally, her voice steady as bedrock. "But my orders are clear. I'm here to observe, to guide where necessary, and to evaluate this company's readiness. You'll address me as captain, and you'll follow protocol." Cole's smirk widened. He had expected defensiveness, maybe anger, something he could use to undermine her further. But her calm reply only made him press harder. "So you can't answer the question. What have you done, Captain Vega, that says you're qualified to stand here and judge us?" The crowd leaned closer, hungry for the crack, the slip, the moment this mysterious officer folded under pressure. Elena's eyes flicked over the cadets, catching their expressions: amusement, disdain, curiosity. Then they returned to Cole. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. Instead, she lifted her hand briefly to adjust her sleeve. For a second, just long enough for those watching closely, a faint scar flashed across the inside of her wrist. It was no ordinary mark. In the sunlight, it seemed to coil and twist, like a serpent waiting to strike. Cole's confidence faltered just slightly, a stutter in his rhythm, though he covered it with a scoff. "Thought so." He turned away, signaling the end of the exchange, but the moment lingered in the air like smoke after a shot. Elena Vega lowered her sleeve, expression unreadable. The whispers resumed, louder now, emboldened by Cole's challenge. She let them have their victory, for now. She played this game before, be underestimated, be dismissed, be mocked. It was a mask she wore well. But beneath the calm exterior, beneath the scar that pulsed faintly under her skin, something older stirred. They had no idea what they were looking at. And before this training cycle was over, Darren Cole and every cadet at Northridge Academy would learn exactly what gave her the right. The order came down with the weight of inevitability. The commandant, a hard man with the eyes of someone who had buried too many soldiers, announced that tonight's training exercise would be different. No observers, no note-taking from the sidelines. Every person in the company, cadets and staff alike, would run the simulation. His gaze lingered on Captain Elena Vega as he said it, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. The cadets erupted into murmurs, barely disguised laughter, the kind that carried sharp edges. They had been waiting for this moment since the day she arrived. By dusk, the staging yard thrummed with anticipation. The cadets checked their rifles, adjusted night vision gear, and whispered bets. Darren Cole made sure his voice carried across the yard. $20 says she doesn't make it past the first sector, he called out, grinning at his peers. Anyone want to put money on her lasting more than 10 minutes? A chorus of chuckles answered him. Stevens, the wiry cadet with too much nervous energy, shook his head with mock sympathy. She'll choke before we even hit the breach point. Watch. Elena said nothing. She sat quietly on a steel bench, assembling her rifle with the calm of someone threading beads, each motion precise, unhurried. The cadets mistook her silence for fear. Cole took it as weakness, striding past her with his weapon slung easy across his chest. Don't worry, Captain, he said, his smirk wide. Stick close to me and maybe I'll keep you alive long enough to finish. When the siren blared, the training ground transformed. Smoke machines flooded the mock urban compound with thick gray haze, lights flickered to simulate power outages, and speakers crackled with the screams and gunfire of a battlefield. Pop-up silhouettes, some marked as combatants, some as civilians, emerged and vanished in the chaos. The rules were simple: neutralize the threats, protect non-combatants, and complete the mission objectives before the timer ran out. Failure to distinguish one from the other meant immediate disqualification. The cadets surged forward in formation, their shouts muffled by the fog. Elena moved after them, her steps silent, her weapon cradled low and ready. Within seconds, the chaos began. Cole's squad fired too fast, hitting anything that moved. A civilian target dropped with a clang, disqualifying half his team on the spot. Stevens panicked at a sudden silhouette and stumbled, his rounds spraying wide. The simulation devoured their discipline, turning the company into scattered shapes groping through smoke and noise. But Elena Vega didn't stumble, she vanished. The first target fell with a clean, single-shot center mass, no hesitation. The sound echoed oddly, bouncing off walls and smoke as though it came from everywhere at once. Another silhouette rose at the far end of the alley. Her rifle barked again, precise, final. To the cadets watching on monitors, it was as if she were bending space itself. One moment, she was pinned in a corner. The next, she was already across the courtyard, eliminating hostiles from angles that should have been impossible. Cameras flickered, sensors went dark. The system, designed to track every movement, couldn't seem to hold her in focus. Monitors displayed static or empty corridors where she should have been. To the instructors in the control tower, it looked less like a simulation and more like a haunting. Inside the fog, Elena moved like water. Her eyes picked civilians from enemies in the split second between appearances. A chalk-marked dummy received a gentle tap on the shoulder before she slipped past. A hostile target barely rose before her muzzle flash cut it down. Not once did her rounds stray. Not once did she hesitate. Cole, stumbling through the haze with sweat stinging his eyes, caught a glimpse of her ahead. She slid between cover with inhuman smoothness, her weapon snapping up and down with surgical economy. For the first time, something colder than anger stirred in him, something he would not name until much later: fear. When the final siren cut through the compound, signaling the end, the cadet staggered out coughing and dripping with sweat. Cole cursed under his breath, his run disqualified after striking 2 civilian targets. Stevens had abandoned half his objectives. The others fared little better. They gathered in uneasy clusters, waiting for the commandant's evaluation. And then Elena emerged from the smoke. Her uniform was untouched, her breathing steady. The rifle in her hands still gleamed clean. She walked to the staging line and set it down with quiet finality. On the monitors above, her score blinked in bold red digits. Perfect. Not a single civilian target hit. Every hostile eliminated, objectives completed in record time. Silence spread through the yard, thicker than the smoke had been. The cadets stared at her, their expressions shifting from smug derision to something tight and unsettled. She met no one's eyes, her face calm, unreadable, as if she'd merely gone for a walk in the fog. Cole swallowed hard, his earlier words echoing in his head like taunts turned back on him. For the first time since he'd arrived at Northridge Academy, the Golden Cadet had nothing to say. Elena Vega stood at ease, her scar hidden beneath her sleeve, and let the silence work. They wanted to know what gave her the right to be here. Tonight was their first answer. The dawn broke pale and sharp over Northridge Academy, the kind of cold light that showed every flaw, every edge, every crack in a soldier's armor. The bugle's call dragged the cadets from uneasy sleep, still rattled from the chaos of the night simulation. Word had spread in hushed whispers. The commandant had sent footage of the exercise up the chain. Someone high, very high, was coming. By the time the company assembled on the parade ground, the air was thick with tension. Boots struck asphalt in unison. Rifles clutched tight, eyes straight ahead, but discipline couldn't mask the undercurrent of dread. Darren Cole stood tall at the front, chin lifted with smug expectation. He was certain of how this would play out. Captain Elena Vega had embarrassed the academy, bypassed protocol, and humiliated cadets who were supposed to be the future of command. The brass would make an example of her, and Cole planned to watch every second of it. The black sedan appeared just after sunrise, gliding through the gates with the inevitability of judgment. General Marcus Trenton stepped out, his presence as heavy as the medals he refused to wear. 30 years in special operations had carved him into something more than a man. His eyes were steel gray, and when they swept across the formation, even the most arrogant cadets felt themselves shrink. The commandant followed, pale and tight-lipped, but it was clear this moment belonged to Trenton alone. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he walked the line, boots crunching against gravel with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a predator circling its prey. He stopped in front of one cadet, studying the twitch of nervous fingers. He paused by another, noting the faint tremor in his jaw. Each silence was a blade, cutting deeper into their composure. Finally, he reached Elena Vega. She stood third from the left, her rifle in perfect ready position, her posture relaxed but precise. Unlike the others, her breathing was steady, her expression unreadable. To the cadets, she looked exactly as she always had: ordinary, unremarkable, a woman whose file read like mediocrity. But Trenton's eyes caught something else, something he'd seen only a handful of times in his career, always on the eve of bloodshed. Cole smirked from his place at the front. This was it. The general would demand an explanation, tear her down in front of everyone, and restore order. Instead, Trenton reached out, his hand steady as stone, and took Elena's left wrist. The movement was gentle, but it carried more weight than a shout. He pushed back her sleeve. Gasps rippled through the ranks. There it was, etched deep into her skin, dark as midnight and unmistakable. A serpent coiled to strike, not ink but scar, burned into flesh with techniques whispered about in classified circles. The Black Viper sigil. Trenton's voice was quiet when it came, but it carried like thunder across the silent yard. "That's a Black Viper mark," he said, his gaze fixed on the scar as if it were a relic of war. His eyes lifted to hers. "Call sign, widow." The words detonated like a shell blast. The formation froze. Every cadet who had mocked her, laughed at her, dismissed her as dead weight, now stood hollow-eyed, realizing what they had been playing with. The Black Vipers were legend operators who didn't exist in any database, whose missions were never acknowledged, whose success was measured only in the silence they left behind. Ghosts who had shaped wars without leaving a trace. Darren Cole felt his throat go dry. He remembered every smirk, every taunt, every casual word of dismissal he had thrown her way. His body wanted to move, to step back, to retreat from the quiet, unassuming woman who now stood revealed as something far beyond him. Elena did not flinch. She did not gloat. She simply met the general's eyes with calm acknowledgement, as if she had known this moment was inevitable. The scar pulsed faintly in the morning light, coiled and waiting. General Trenton released her wrist and turned slowly to face the company. His voice carried across the parade ground, flat with authority. "You questioned her credentials. You doubted her presence here. Now you know. You've spent weeks mocking a soldier whose existence is classified at the highest levels. Remember this lesson. True power rarely announces itself. It watches. It waits. And when it moves, the world changes." No one breathed. No one dared. Cole's smirk was gone, replaced by the pale, stiff mask of someone standing at the edge of an abyss. The cadets, who had once seen Captain Vega as nothing more than a checkbox on a roster, now looked at her with awe and fear. The woman they had tried to break had been a legend all along. And in that moment, the balance of the academy shifted forever. By the next morning, the academy felt like a different world. The whispers that once carried mockery had turned into hushed reverence, cadets lowering their voices when Captain Elena Vega walked past. Those who had laughed at her now stumbled over themselves to salute first, their eyes darting away quickly, as though afraid of meeting her gaze for too long. Even the instructors, hardened men who had carved reputations through war and attrition, treated her with the careful distance usually reserved for minefields. The revelation of her mark had cracked open the illusion, and now every cadet saw her not as a placeholder or an unwanted observer, but as a legend walking in their midst. The transformation was hardest on Darren Cole. His swagger was gone, his easy arrogance burned away overnight. The golden boy of North Ridge, once untouchable in his peers' eyes, now wore shame like a second skin. He avoided her at first, circling wide when she entered the mess hall, speaking quieter when she was within earshot. But guilt gnawed at him with every step. He remembered every time he had taunted her, every sneer, every challenge, and he could not shake the memory of her steady silence, the way she had absorbed every slight, without reply. Finally, late one evening after drills, he found her alone at the edge of the training yard, watching the sunset bleed over the walls. "Captain Vega," he began, his voice unsteady. She didn't turn. Cole. He swallowed hard, forcing the words past pride. "I was wrong. About you. About everything. His throat tightened. "I treated you like you didn't belong here. Like you hadn't earned it. And now," he trailed off, shame flooding him. At last, she faced him. Her eyes were dark, unreadable, but they carried the weight of something older than his arrogance, older than his guilt. "Tell me, Cadet," she said quietly. "What exactly did you learn?" He hesitated, searching for the answer that mattered. That strength isn't always written down on a file, that the most dangerous person in the room might not look like it, and that how we treat the ones we think are weak says everything about who we are. Her gaze held him there, unblinking, until he felt stripped bare. Then, at last, she gave a single nod. "Good. Remember it. And teach it. That's the real lesson." From that day forward, Elena Vega became more than an observer. She took over advanced instruction with the authority of someone who didn't need to explain herself. Her methods were nothing like Sergeant Kane's brutal ego games. She taught cadets to move through shadows without leaving a trace, to read a battlefield, not as a collection of targets, but as a living map of terrain, sound, and opportunity. She showed them how to distinguish the smallest tells in an opponent's body language, how to prepare for dangers that manuals never mentioned. More than tactics, she drilled into them, respect the ability to see strength in quiet places, to understand that survival often depended on the underestimated. The cadets changed under her hand. Stevens, once jittery and mocking, learned to channel his nervous energy into sharp focus, moving with a precision that surprised even him. Morrison, cruel by habit, grew quieter, more disciplined, his arrogance tempered by a newfound humility. And Darren Cole, who had once sneered the loudest, now worked harder than anyone, throwing himself into every drill as though redemption itself was waiting at the finish line. Weeks later, a transport bus groaned to a stop at the academy gates. A new group of recruits stumbled out, blinking in the harsh sun. Among them was a young woman, small, nervous, her uniform hanging loose on her frame. The older cadets watched, their whispers beginning in the same cruel tones they had once reserved for Elena. But before the mockery could gather force, Darren Cole stepped forward, his voice sharp with command. "Knock it off," he said. "She's one of us now, and we don't underestimate our own." Stevens moved to stand beside him. Morrison followed a beat later. The whispers died quickly. From a distance, Elena Vega observed the exchange. She stood in the shadows, her sleeve shifted just enough that the faint serpent scar caught the fading light. A small, knowing smile touched her lips. They had learned, they were changing, and this was only the beginning. The real training had begun.